At such a time as this, when paradigms have shifted more than glacial plates, when nature bleeds toxic tears for Mother Earth, when politicians dig in their heels, twisting truth, manufacturing catastrophes, distracting the masses from meaningful dialogue, discourse, and discovery, lest history shine favorably on parties or races other than their own. At such a time as this, writings on the wall tell us it's now or never at all. Time to end the political mass manipulation games, time to straighten our aim, end neo-colonial reign, pursue a future anchored in humanity's sanctity before the prospect for any future is literally taken away. At such a time as this.
License and registration, he can sense your aggravation.
On the head of the fallen angel.
When the world is muttering under the floorboards, stomp even louder.
Time.
Let them know you are alive today.
Or unhum.
Did you know that your hands came with a ripple effect?
Whisper tones unraveling like silk.
Blood, sweat, and tears win by any means poetry.
Sway, look at me. Is a piece of the pie too good for me?
Some may call it rock the mic. We call it poetry.
Hello, welcome once again to Sojourn with Words right here on CTV, airing out of Prince George's County, Maryland, stateside, USA. We have to say all that because, of course, today's programs are virtual, which means we can be viewed around the world. And we are so thrilled to be able to present this particular poet who is known literally around the world because his subject matter is so broad. I'm speaking about analysis. His stage name is Analysis, and we'll leave it at that. But many of you have known him from the Baltimore area. But let's start with a proper bio. Analysis is a spoken word poet, rad minister, bookseller, and educator. Now, the Baltimore native who studied public communication at the American University and divinity at Howard University has featured across the Northeast US and online. He is host of Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry Vibe, author of Somewhere Through the Haze, and the album A Couple Thousand Years Later. He is a member of Simply Poetic, Entertainment and Restoration Village Arts. The quote was provided. Emily Dickinson said, famously, I might add, "If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry." Analysis cuts heads off. That's by Pamela Murray Winters, also a poet of some repute here in the metro area. Analysis, welcome to Sojourn with Words.
Thank you so much. It is so very good to be here. This is an honor. Trust me, this is a wonderful thing.
Well, it's been a while coming, but we're very, very happy to have you here in our 16th year of Sojourn with Words.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That's no light feat.
Not at all. This month, no less. 16 years ago in November. Now, I'm sure that you've already had, topics presented to you, all the standard about your writing style and how, well, actually, I do want to hear the answer to this question. How did you come up with your name? Analysis.
That's always a fun question.
Yes, it is.
That folk like to ask. When I got into poetry about, a dozen or 13 years ago, somewhere around there, for the first couple of years, I wasn't even thinking about taking a name per se. And then when I got more and more into the art form and saw that it's something that I was going to stay in and really try to take to a next level, I thought about what name I would be interested in taking. And there were a whole lot of names that ran through my head. There had to have been like 9, 10, 12 names going through my head. I'm like, Ken, you can't have all of those names. You have to settle on one. And, you know, out of all the things that I thought reflected me or aspects of me and that I thought had a stylish sound to it, I narrowed it down to 2 finalists, if you will. One was the term African, which is an old thing I came up with decades ago as a little hip hop type name. And not that I've ever, you know, been on the hip hop scene and never broke into it, but I just came up with that for the fun of it many years ago. Capital A, small FR, I, capital K, small EN. So playing on my real name, which is Ken. And so it was between that and analysis. And I settled on analysis. One of the reasons why I like it, in addition to my hope that my poetry encourages critical analysis and thinking and helps people wrestle with issues, but I also liked it because it had kind of a very one-word, sleek power, if you will, to it. A very, you know, kind of cutting edge sound to it. And, you know, I had friends in the area up in Connecticut, which is kind of where I was born into poetry when I was living up there, that had some powerful names like Concept, Influence. And I like that one word power to it. And so I settled on analysis for mine. And it seems to have worked. It seems to have stuck.
I absolutely agree. It suits you well. I'm familiar with your work, and I think it's a perfect nom de plume, as one would say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for choosing the name that really gives a story of who you are. Now, you talk about a lot of different things in your poetry, but certainly the issue of history is paramount, and socio-political analysis, quote unquote, certainly factor into your writing. Talk about that. I mean, is this a heavy hitter by choice, or is it just where you naturally gravitated because that's where your interest is?
I think a bit of both. I think that it is a natural thing for me in terms of my interest and background over many years. It goes all the way back to being raised in a church that was very attentive to civil rights and political issues, and, you know, raised under a minister, Reverend Wendell Phillips, and my own family members who were involved in the movement. It goes into my days as a college student and as a young adult, being more aware of justice issues throughout the 80s and 90s, be it international issues as far as US imperialism, be it, you know, whatever the case may be. It certainly relates to my approach to theological practice and ministry, being that of our endeavors to make this on earth as it is in heaven and actually transform society into a more just one. And so, you know, I've always had that particular interest in social political issues and history. My father is a historian. So that's been part of my background. But, you know, to take it into the art form of poetry, there was no question that that's where I wanted my poetry to go. And so when we talk about, you know, we as poets always talk about what inspires us to write a particular piece. Many of my pieces are conscious decisions to address a particular topic. So that's not to say that there's nothing inspirational or shall I say inspired in me, an energy that inspires me to do it. But that energy is related to a conscious decision very often to address a particular issue, either that I've been involved in or that I think needs addressing, or that type of thing. So it's a natural meld. It's a natural merge for me.
Okay. Well, I certainly, when I saw in your information that you're both, you know, communications, but also religion as to, the two anchors of education in your background, that I think was very telling when I think about the messages that I've heard you lift over the years with regard to, is there a particular vantage point that you see your messages of activism? Because clearly, well, first of all, do you consider your poetry to be activist poetry?
I think so,
Okay.
but
I mean, there's
that's
informative poetry and activist poetry don't necessarily have to be one and the same, but your poetry is so moving, and the cases that you make are so valid that it's hard to dispute the points that you make. But one does not necessarily come to poetry as an activist. I choose to, but that's not every poet's path. So, talk to us about, what is it that you hope to do through your poetry?
I think the key question that we're raising here is how to make our art activist, or how to put it into action. Okay. And it's something that I think about more and more in terms of how is it that I can put my art in a position where it is influencing, where it is part of the struggle, capital S. Okay. So, if I can get it into positions where I'm either educating somebody and or inspiring somebody and or challenging somebody on their views and pushing them to think critically and to act differently and act more justly and that type of thing, then it becomes action poetry or activist poetry, to use your term, that type of thing. It is one thing to come to the venue and to spit a poem, and those that you are in regular contact with are there and they love it, and you get kind of a preaching to the choir feeling, which is not to say that that's unimportant. It is important, because we have to, strengthen ourselves and keep ourselves fed. But I think my challenge, going forward, is to how more and more to put it into a position where it is leveraging some kind of benefit for the struggle as a whole. So my hope is that activists and organizers and leaders and from the grassroots on up will be able to utilize what I can offer.
Okay, well, we certainly have learned a lot about Analysis the man. How about we now really delve into and listen to Analysis the poet? Analysis, what do you have for us?
Well, I think I will offer a poem that I wrote a few years ago for an event called Ecumenical Advocacy Days. It's called The Selling of Souls, and that's spelled with a C, the selling of souls. The old folk used to say, Paul and Silas, bound in jail, sing God's praise both night and day. And I hope that Trump might blow me home to the New Jerusalem. I hope it does blow them home, although seized in the marketplace of human capital. But right now, all I hear trumpeted or blustering boast about being tough on crime and misleading media made to maintain some manufactured war on drugs that keeps officials chasing the scream of those in need while ignoring their cries for help. Thus, sales swell. More dwell in them here in the land of liberty than anywhere else. Even the smallest or most repentant for of offenses could get you caught up in the maze of mandatory minimums. This mandates a story, at minimum of telling of truth, because this situation has many doing time, and time keeps on slipping into the future. We want to fly like an eagle. But all we see is the new Jim Crow in the societal cage, with human rights perverted in the presence of the Most High, human rights deserted, people missing, broken families cry, millions on the inside near forgotten. Do we ask why? Seems like folk could care less how they got there, or if numbers die in deplorable conditions, their lamentations being met with lamentable lies. Oh, sure. The rulers speak pretty words about equal justice, but modify their verbs to contain no action. Their sentence structure is unbalanced, with a biased read-down that predicates a belief that people of color and poor whites are to be relegated to a subordinate clause. Pardon my grammar, but that ish just ain't right. And the only corrections I see are the glaring ones that need to be made to this criminal injustice system. Both public and privatized prisons are run like rental companies, with individuals treated as junk for storage. This arrangement might have you hauled away, but this ain't Mom's Attica. It's the sand quintessential squelching of souls, with no renaissance of freedom in Florence, more like a crucifixion of lives, an Angola 3 up on crosses of falsehood, fear, and greed. Even the Nazarene would catch the fulsome prison blues under these conditions. Imagine if the carpenter had to sing a song of stolen liberties. Countless communion in his name, yet act as if the least of these are mere unleavened, worth passing over. Take 2.2 million of the Creator's loved ones locked up in the U.S. Add to them the 21 million of God's children, many just children, carted around the world as chattel, driven by the trade in forced sex and labor, and you got gridlock on the road to any rights with nobody moving freely. Up next, human traffic and weather, or not you choose to reroute your eyes around it, it's still there. Wonder why this absurdity is so out of control? Follow the money. The prison industrial isn't that complex when its context is clarified as corporate players monopolizing human beings like tokens after they land on go to jail. It's easier to figure when you factor in the foolishness of police districts blowing up their bookings and filling beds. See, this is slavery by any other name. Oh, wait now. The loophole in the 13th does call it that, doesn't it? Well, there it is. Easy as 1, 2, 3. The strikes you get before being struck out of the full roster of citizenship, sent down to the minors, disenfranchised. You don't even get that many swings if you are the away team trying to play in the home park of the privileged. Hardworking folk forced to flee their forebears' farms due to falling prices fashioned by free trade agreements, or fleeing violent factions fueled by arms forged in northern factories and Faustian pacts between our federal and its nefarious friends. Thousands go through hell to get here only to arrive in hell. Surprised? Well, you won't hear tell of this too much now. Welcoming government quells this, trying to keep it on the slide, but now detention is a family affair, with everyday people rounded up together then torn apart. Parents and children made separate, but equal is the pain in their hearts. They were hoping this country would want them to stay, but they discovered that even here, not everybody is a star. For them, there's no hot fun in the summertime because they got iced. So while they're made to dance to the music of orchestrated racism, they look for allies to help take them higher. Question is, will we stand with them, doing everything we can so that their God-given dignity is respected and they can be themselves again? We are the ones who must make the earth quake. We are the trumpets that must make the wall shake with justice that opens doors and blows the captives home. Indeed, we might be the next captives. So either we lock arms with those on lockdown or our spirits languish. Our action is of seismic importance. We better not blow it.
Analysis, vintage analysis, I might say. Thank you so very much for that powerful piece.
You're quite welcome.
Absolutely. Well, we've certainly introduced Sojourn with Words viewers to analysis, and that's what we very much want to do. Analysis, when you talk about, well, first of all, let's back up, because you do something that not every poet has chosen to do. You host a poetry venue. Tell us about that. What's going on there in Baltimore?
Yeah.
And how long has it been happening and when is it happening? Talk to us.
I was very blessed to be invited in 2012 to begin a poetry venue at a place very dear to me. It's called Red Emma's Bookstore Coffee House. It is a worker-owned, worker collective project that started in Baltimore in 2004. I was a fan and supporter of theirs really since 2005. I was living out of town at the time, but anytime I was back home, I'd come and spend time in there. And so when I actually moved back to Maryland in 2012, they knew enough about me and my ethos and framework, and I knew enough about them so that they felt comfortable in inviting me to begin a poetry presence there. It is a radical left, anarchist-founded worker collective, and its current location is at 1225 Cathedral Street in Baltimore. We are about to move next year. I say we because I eventually joined the staff as a bookseller there. And the venue is called Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry Vibe. Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry Vibe. I named it that because Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman had a radical left magazine in the early part of the 20th century called Mother Earth. And it is a quarterly venue, the first Saturdays of February, May, August, and November. Our theme is peace, justice, poetry. So it's not so much the Love Jones night, so to speak, as it is bringing one's consciousness and justice pieces and social, political, or family or life survival pieces and that type of thing. And we've been going since 2012, and it's just been a 5-star array of featured poets that we've had for most of the pandemic. I was online. We had our first in-person event since the pandemic began just recently in November. And as I say, we're about to move again, so we may be online during the move. But it really has just been a fantastic, I think it's been a blessing, a poetic blessing for many people in the DMV area.
There are many that have become familiar with your venue as well as your personal works of poetry. And analysis is known for that socio-political and all of that, but we're all multifaceted people. So if analysis were to, say, step outside of his normal poetry reign and live in a fantasy world where poetry represented more than just the social and significant issues of the day, say in a fantasy mind, what would you really like to be doing besides performing poetry, stepping outside of analysis? Maybe you would then be Ken. Tell us.
I have always indulged in the daydream that if I could just get in shape, if I could just get in top physical condition once more, that even at my advanced years, gray hair and all, that I would stir the world up and crack into the major professional soccer leagues, and that I would actually play in MLS, DC United. If you're listening, give me about a year to get back in shape, and then I'll come down to get a workout, or maybe over to the English Premier League or somewhere, and I could be that old pro shooting 60 guy who actually is taking the world by storm on the soccer field. And yes, I think fantasy was a very apt word you chose.
Okay.
Now that you've heard that, now that all your listeners are hearing that and they're shaking their heads like, this old guy, he's lost it.
Well, we're all former athletes. I don't know. I used to be the tennis buff and played many a league, but that was another lifetime. So I know what you mean when you have those reminiscent views of.
Well, when I make it onto United, you can play for the Washington Castles also, and we'll be there together as the old folk doing the thing.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, these are things that inspire us sometimes in ways that we don't even anticipate when we're writing poetry in the here and now. But truly, when you talk about your current wheelhouse, that of justice and human rights, what is it that you would like to see poetry accomplish during your lifetime? Not some lofty, generations or eons from now, but what would you like to see poetry be about today?
The arts are so crucial, as we know, in the struggle, capital S, and Justice Matters. And you've seen arts really inspire people to move and to act. And I hope that in some way my poetry will be able to do that, to continue to make sure that we, and I'm looking at myself now, I'm talking to myself, that I and we continue to be on the front lines in terms of our action. Again, as we talked about earlier, taking that art into action, and I hope that it pushes some people to really be a little bit more critically analytical and conscious of some issues. So if I'm doing a poem about U.S. imperialism, I want people to actually stop supporting so blindly U.S. militarism and getting caught up in, as I say in one of my poems, the drug of patriotism and that type of thing. I want people to actually shift their worldview and their consciousness on some things to be far more forward and far more critically analytical, and then to act on those things. So I really hope that people can take my poetry into the home, into to work for discussions, into Bible study and study at any house of worship and house of faith, into organizations and actually use it, not just enjoy the poetry, but actually use it, wrestle with it, fight with it, wrestle with it, and let it inform one's discussions and one's consciousness and action.
So what would you give as a call to arms? You've been given the microphone, you've been given the megaphone even. Give us a poem that would be your call to arms through poetry.
That's a very interesting question. I've never been asked with that particular phraseology, and I like that. I'm going to lift up a poem that I'm not going to do in its entirely. It's actually, even by my standards, it's my longest poem, but it is really kind of my social theological treatise, if you will. It's called Better Friday. And as you might be able to guess, that's a play on the term Good Friday. It is a poem that is my retelling of the crucifixion story with my particular kind of justice and rad left social political lens. And
before you started, you said that you're not going to do it in its entirety. So is there some place where people can see or purchase or obtain the full poem?
There is. There are two places, actually. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there is a book. It's called Somewhere Through the Haze. It is a short collection of justice and human rights pieces. You can find that. The easiest way to get it is to go to redemmas.org, the website of the project I mentioned earlier, redemmas.org, and purchase it there within the United States, in other countries, available in many countries at lulu.com. There is a new album. It is called A Couple Thousand Years Later, and it is available on Bandcamp. So if you go to bandcamp.com and you look for the album A Couple Thousand Years Later, my particular location on Bandcamp is analysis1, the numeral 1, analysis1.bandcamp.com. And you can download A Couple Thousand Years Later there, and I have it recorded with a wonderful music piece behind it on that album.
Okay, so give us a portion of.
Just a little snippet. I'll just give a bit of the opening and try to make sure to edit anything for our program here. It starts off with the old spiritual, "Were you there?" And so many of your listeners are familiar with that. So I'll go right into the piece. Were you there? Did you see that, Ish? People came from miles around like actors in some morbid tragedy, taking their place at the place of the skull. It was a hellified scene as the crowd swelled, hurling lynch mob epithets and taking bets as this radical organizer who posed a threat was hung up to dry. A working class brother getting worked over. And in the midst of the laughs and jeers, the cries and tears, there was no rescue. No cavalry. No, he was history. He must have had Albert Sabo as a judge, and maybe it was Pontius who piloted Mumia on the death row. They had to take him out. He should have known they wouldn't go for no uppity nigga, but I guess he figured he was big and bad. Maybe he spent too much time as a kid with his cousins down south that may out making him want to change the world. Mouthing off the respectable folk, whipping that behind in the temple. Oh, no, he done gone too far now. Interrupting the avarice, disrupting the cash flow. Should have stayed seen and not heard. Now they strung him up for all to see. Strange fruit hanging from Palestinian trees. And it goes on for there. I'm aware of our time, but that just kind of gives listeners a framing of where I'm trying to go with that.
Okay, that is certainly a good setup. And we hope that our viewers will contact you or reach out to purchase the book or the album and learn about more poetry by analysis. With regard to the work that you do as it affects young poets today, are you one to mentor, or is that not something that you pursue? How is it that you believe that poetry can continue for future generations?
Well, one of the things that has been amazing to me and a delight as someone who came into poetry a lot later in life, I was in my 40s by the time I really fell into the art form. It's been amazing for me to see all of the amazing young talent in teens and 20 somethings and what have you, that is in the poetry world generally, and certainly here in the DMV. The DMV is a hotbed for poetic talent, including in that subset of poetry that we call spoken word, national champions and so forth. And so, I, if anything, probably learn and gain as much from them as they may gain from me. But certainly when I'm approached, to assist poetically, I basically encourage people, find what your voice is, get it down, start getting it down on the paper or the computer screen, as it were, and find your voice, and then, get whatever comes out down. Then you can come back and refine it and work with it and find your voice. And certainly I've had the opportunity to interact with young people through, for example, Do More Baltimore, working with young poets, young people in community activism in Baltimore. That's DEW, More Baltimore, and in other settings. And, it's
actually, before you go any further, and we're already over time, but I do want to say, we got to have you back. That's just all there is to it.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yes, this has been analysis on Sojourn with Words right here on CTV. I'm Sistah Joy. We're wrapping it up tight, but we want to make sure that everybody knows how to be in touch. Analysis, your contact information will be on the screen when this airs, so not to worry. But thank you so much for being our guest. And always, when we're with Sojourn with Words, first and foremost, remember to pick up a pen and keep writing.